The fire had long since burned out, leaving behind a ring of ash and silence deep in the Gifford Pinchot National Forest. Smoke once curled upward where stories were shared and laughter echoed beneath the thick pine canopy. But now, only the wind spoke through the trees. It was here, among the ancient groves and moss-covered stones, that Derek and Nancy Harkins vanished without a trace, swallowed by the dense wilderness like whispers into the dark. For 4 long years, their disappearance was a haunting enigma, a scar carved into the heart of Washington's wilderness. Then, in the cold of early spring, as melting snow revealed the Earth's frozen secrets, something was found, buried beneath layers of earth and time, a discovery so disturbing, so heartbreakingly final, that it unraveled every theory ever spun in search of the truth. The day they went missing began like any other sunlight dancing on the tense nylon walls, the scent of campfire coffee mingling with dew, a quiet so serene it bordered on sacred. Derek had packed the cooler with meticulous precision, a habit forged from years of hiking in unpredictable terrains. Nancy, barefoot and humming a song only she remembered fully, scribbled a note in the weathered leather journal she carried everywhere, the one her sister would later clutch like a relic. They had driven deep into the forest, far past the popular trails, following GPS coordinates Derek had marked months before. A secluded spot, unreachable by accident, chosen for its solitude. Their last cell phone ping echoed off a nearby tower at 8:46 in the morning, then nothing, as if the trees had closed behind them. Their lives paused in a still frame no one would see until it was too late, or perhaps not even then. At first, no one noticed. A missed call here, an unanswered text there, easy to excuse when you're off-grid in the wild. Family brushed it off as much-needed time away. Friends, envious even, imagined the couple roasting marshmallows by moonlight. It wasn't until Derek's brother Calvin grew uneasy that the silence turned sinister. He knew his brother too well. Derek was punctual, precise. A firefighter whose instincts were wired to anticipate danger. When 3 days passed without a word, Calvin drove the winding roads himself, retraced maps scrawled in Derek's handwriting, and stood where his brother's truck should have been, but there was only forest. No tire tracks, no broken branches, not even a wrapper in the dirt. The trailhead surveillance camera caught nothing. Local rangers conducted a sweep. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Volunteers combed through the underbrush. And yet, the forest held its breath and gave nothing back. Just an unending green, and the whisper of something gone very wrong. In the weeks that followed, search teams returned day after day, their boots pressing into damp moss, their voices echoing against canyon walls. Cadaver dogs sniffed through the undergrowth, pausing at half-dug burrows and long-forgotten game trails. No cries for help, no clothing snagged on a limb, not a single sign of struggle. It was as though nature had conspired to erase every footprint. Nancy's mother, Eleanor, arrived from Spokane with shaking hands and a flask of her daughter's favorite tea, pouring it onto the forest floor like an offering. Calvin slept in his car, parked at the base of the trail, refusing to leave. He whispered his brother's name into the dark trees, again and again, hoping for an echo, a sound, anything. But the forest answered back only with silence. And in that silence, a single question took root, growing thorned and tangled inside every mind touched by the story. How can two people simply disappear without the world noticing? 4 months after their disappearance, autumn settled over the Pacific Northwest in a tapestry of gold and rust. But for the Harkins families, time collapsed into a single, unrelenting moment, stuck in limbo between memory and nightmare. Calvin, now gaunt and sleepless, began to track rumors circulating among cryptid hunters and off-the-grid survivalists. People who claimed the forest held places not marked on any map, pockets of land avoided even by seasoned hikers. One name came up over and over. Dead Man's Hollow, a stretch of terrain steeped in folklore, the kind locals half joke about but never enter after sunset. Calvin didn't laugh. He traced it on an old forestry chart Derek had once used, and found a route. According to legend, the hollow had once been a mining site swallowed by landslides, cursed ever since. But Calvin wasn't chasing ghosts. He was chasing something real, and he believed he felt it was watching, waiting. When he ventured into the hollow, guided only by an old compass and sheer desperation, he found his first clue. Half buried in moss and decaying leaves was a zipper, torn clean from a jacket, Derek's jacket, and underneath it, carved into the bark of a tree at waist height, were 4 frantic letters: N-A-N-C. Not a name, a cry. The discovery ignited something feral inside Calvin, a spark of hope tainted with dread. He marked the coordinates and returned with deputies 2 days later. But when they reached the site, the zipper was gone. Trees that once bore carvings now stood unmarked, the bark smoothed as if time itself had recoiled. Search dogs refused to go further, whimpering and circling shadows, their fur bristling without visible threat. One handler, a veteran of 30 years, later admitted he'd never seen anything like it. The silence had weight, like the air itself recoiled from intrusion. Investigators called it a dead lead. Calvin called it something else, a warning. But he was undeterred. He began to document everything: the fluctuating magnetics on his compass, the way GPS signals jumped erratically in the hollow, the strange echo of footsteps that never belonged to him. Somewhere in those woods, he believed, a story had been caught mid-sentence, its final words buried in roots and stone. He would not stop until he unearthed it. Meanwhile, Nancy's sister, Lauren, turned to a different kind of pursuit. One driven less by maps and more by memories. She began to comb through Nancy's journals, dozens of them stretching back to high school, their pages flickering with poems, dreams, and fragments of an inner world no one had fully known. But it was the last journal, the one Nancy brought on that final trip, that held a chilling shift in tone. The entries grew erratic, fragmented. One passage stood out. "He's been everywhere lately. Woods feel thinner, like something's peeking through." Lauren had dismissed it at first. Poetic? Perhaps wistful. But in the context of what followed, every line felt like a breadcrumb, a scream across time. The final entry was only one sentence, scrawled in deep pressure that bled through the page: "If we don't come back, the forest chose." Words that read less like a farewell and more like a verdict, etched in ink, trembling with something deeper than fear. Choice, sacrifice, or perhaps surrender. By the spring of the second year, the case had faded from headlines, eclipsed by newer tragedies and the brutal apathy of time. Yet for those closest to Derek and Nancy, the silence had only deepened into obsession. Lauren, tortured by the cryptic final journal entry, began to dig into the lore surrounding the forest itself. It wasn't just Dead Man's Hollow across Gifford, Pinchot. She uncovered a chilling pattern dating back decades. Dozens of cases, scattered yet eerily similar. Hikers missing without a trace. Search teams reporting bizarre compass readings. Indigenous tales warning of veil-thin places, where the land blurred with something older, waiting. She compiled these disappearances into charts and timelines plastered across her apartment walls, their intersecting strings converging on a tight cluster of unmarked land. It was there that she swore she saw Nancy once, in a grainy trail cam photo posted anonymously to a fringe forum, a blurred figure, barefoot, standing perfectly still at the tree line, dressed in what looked like a faded red flannel. The exact one Nancy had been wearing that morning, 4 years before. Lauren didn't sleep that night, because it wasn't just the shirt, it was the look in the woman's eyes, wide, hollow, and fixed on something behind the camera like she knew she was being watched. The photo was dismissed by authorities as a case of pareidolia, a trick of shadow and suggestion, but Lauren couldn't shake the truth she felt in her bones. She printed it, framed it, and hung it above her desk alongside one of Nancy's old childhood drawings, both images haunted by the same unplaceable sorrow. Lauren wasn't alone in her fixation. Locals began whispering again. Old stories dug out like splinters. Search parties who heard singing in the trees yet found no one. Children who came home from woodland hikes with different colored eyes, or memories of places they swore didn't exist. An elderly ranger, long retired, sent Lauren a box of maps, annotated with cryptic X's and single-word warnings. Thin. Echo. Not alone. The deeper she dug, the more the forest transformed, from setting to character, from background to antagonist. Something out there had taken her sister. And worse, something out there might still be watching. Waiting. Writing an ending only it could control. In late October of the third year, the forest exhaled a secret. A group of amateur spelunkers, drawn by a recently uncovered sinkhole near Panther Creek, stumbled upon what they first believed to be remnants of an old camping site. Beneath the collapsed earth lay a skeletal framework, splintered wood, burned canvas, rusting cookware webbed in moss, and something else, half buried in compacted soil, protruding like a hand reaching skyward, was what authorities later confirmed as a titanium wedding band, inscribed with initials D.N. August 12th. The recovery team unearthed more: a weather-shredded journal with pages too waterlogged to read, a clump of blonde hair tangled in a blackberry briar, and beneath a slab of fallen stone, a charred fragment of bone. DNA confirmed the unthinkable. One of them had died here. But which one? And why had no one ever found this spot before? A void opened in the investigation, one not just of facts, but of reason, for just beyond the shallow pit, the forest floor gave way to an expanse of cleared land, unnaturally precise, circular, devoid of growth, untouched by even the moss that clung to every other surface. Investigators took soil samples. Nothing grew there. Nothing ever had. A place that bore no name on any map. Just a ring in the forest. Empty. Waiting. Rumors spiraled like wood smoke through the nearby town's ghost camps, government cover-ups, black sites veiled by national parks. But deeper than the conspiracy was a darker, more intimate terror, because what the investigators didn't know, or perhaps wouldn't say, was that the circular clearing matched accounts from 2 other missing persons files, buried in archives with red handwriting, recovered at Site 0. Lauren got her hands on one, by accident or design, when an anonymous package wrapped in old topo maps appeared at her door. Inside was a worn cassette tape, labeled only with the date, March 14, 1982. On it, the faded voice of a man crackled through static. She walked into the ring and didn't look back. I told her not to answer the singing. It sounds like your name, but it isn't. It's never your name. She smiled like she already knew. The rest was silence, a silence that felt almost sentient. To Lauren, this wasn't just coincidence. It was repetition. It was ritual. And somehow, her sister had become part of it. Not missing, perhaps, but chosen. Driven by a terrifying combination of grief and resolve, Lauren made a choice. She packed her car with camping gear, audio recording equipment, and every journal Nancy had ever written, including the one with the final words. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. In the early haze of dawn, she left civilization behind, retracing the exact route Derek and Nancy had taken 4 years earlier. Trees pressed tight against the gravel road like mourners at a funeral procession. The deeper she drove, the more the world sharpened into silence. When she reached the coordinates, Lauren stepped out and whispered Nancy's name into the wind. The word, fragile. Almost sacred. The clearing looked untouched, eerily identical to the one Derek had chosen, except now it bore the weight of prophecy. Then, her recorder picked up something she couldn't hear in real time. A faint melody. Not quite human, not quite bird, just 4 haunting notes. Repeating, repeating. As if the forest was singing back. That night, Lauren slept beneath the ancient canopy, as her sister once had, the weight of memory pressing down like the sky itself. The fire she lit sputtered against the creeping cold, casting jagged shadows that moved when she didn't. She dreamed. But not in the way people normally do. It was as if the forest offered her something: fragments of sensation, suspended images. Nancy's journal floating in water. Derek's hand reaching through pine needles, a circle of stones pulsing faintly in the dark. She woke to the sound of footsteps just outside the edge of her light, slow and deliberate, fading when she looked that way. Her voice cracked as she called out first to Nancy, then to nothing at all. The forest, for the first time, answered. A whisper not in her ear, but in her marrow. "You're close." Just 2 words, too clear to be imagined. And though she should have packed up and run, Lauren stayed, because that whisper wasn't a warning, it was a welcome. At sunrise, a heavy fog draped the forest floor like a burial shroud, muting the colors, muting the world. Lauren stepped into the ring, that strange, sterile clearing where nothing dared to grow, and stood still, her breath rising in coils that never drifted far. She held the photo of Nancy in one hand, the journal in the other. The singing had stopped. In its place, a void trembled in the air, thick with expectation. Suddenly, her recorder flared to life on its own. Static, then a voice. Not Nancy's, not Derek's. A childlike whisper, disjointed and laced with weeping. She gave the name. It took her whole. The battery drained seconds later. Lauren knelt, pressing her palm into the earth, and for the briefest moment, the ground pulsed. Warm, alive. Something ancient breathing just beneath. She looked up. The trees swayed without wind, forming a crooked corridor into the woods. A path that hadn't been there before. And then, from deep within that shadowed corridor, a shape emerged. Not animal, not quite human. Draped in red flannel, barefoot, eyes wide and empty. It did not walk, it glided. Lauren gasped, whispering, "Nancy!" But the figure did not respond. Instead, it raised a trembling hand and pointed behind her. Lauren turned slowly, heart hammering against her ribs like a warning drum. Behind her, the forest had shifted. The clearing was gone. In its place stood a wall of trees, dense and ancient, forming a perfect circle around her, the same ring she had entered. But now it held her like a snare. Panic surged. Her breath stung in her lungs. But before she could run, before she could even scream, something stopped her. A sound. A voice. Low. Harmonic. Whispered in unison by hundreds of mouths she could not see. "Welcome home." The figure in the red flannel dissolved like mist before her eyes, unraveling into flecks of ash. And then, the silence dropped. Not like an absence, but a weight. Lauren fell to her knees, clutching Nancy's journal, tears streaking her face. In the sky above, clouds spiraled into a perfect eye, and for a single, infinite second, she felt everything. Derek's final breath, Nancy's last stare across the firelight, the hum of a name spoken in the wrong tongue. The forest was not evil. It was not kind. It was ancient. And it remembered. It chose. And finally, it had closed the story it began 4 years before. Somewhere outside the trees, the world marched on, unaware of what was written in the roots, or what price silence could demand. But deep within Gifford Pinchot, the ring remained, empty, waiting. But stories, like seeds, do not die in the dirt. They wait. Wait for light, for questions, for someone brave or broken enough to dig. And so, 3 months after Lauren vanished without a trace, Calvin stood again at the edge of the forest, eyes sunken, voice hoarse from silence. The investigation into Nancy and Derek had long since gone cold, buried beneath bureaucracy and myth. Lauren's name was now added to the same list, sealed with the same shrug of unanswered loss. Yet in Calvin's weathered hands, he held something new, a photograph taken by a trail cam owned by an amateur biologist, never meant to capture more than elk. But there in the corner, partly hidden behind the ferns, stood a figure. Not Lauren. Not Nancy. A man. Tall, gaunt, his firefighter badge dulled by years, yet still recognizable, still worn. Derek. Eyes vacant. Shirt tattered, staring straight into the lens like he knew it was looking, like he was trying to remember what it was to be seen. Behind him, just at the edge of the frame, a crooked ring of trees bent inward like teeth, open, and still waiting. The image haunted Calvin. He printed it, studied every detail, magnified every pixel, desperate to decode the unspoken message in Derek's lifeless gaze. It wasn't fear. It wasn't surrender. It was as if he was suspended at the edge of memory, tethered to some unseen force, not quite present but not entirely gone. Calvin traced the backdrop, the twisted trees, the unnatural bend of their trunks, the way the light seemed to dim at the forest's edge. And then he noticed it. A pattern, faint and fractal, carved into the bark of 3 trees behind Derek. Symbols, ancient or accidental, impossible to tell. But Calvin had seen them before, etchings on the inside cover of Nancy's final journal. He retrieved it from his safe box, hands trembling. The marks matched. Precisely. This wasn't just coincidence. It was a map. An invitation. Or a trap. Calvin didn't care. That night, beneath a moon draped in storm clouds, with nothing left to lose but himself, he packed a flashlight, a compass that never worked properly near Dead Man's Hollow, and the photo. And as thunder growled low across the wilderness, he disappeared into the forest, into the mouth of the waiting ring, chasing a name that echoed endlessly in the dark. The storm broke shortly after he vanished beyond the trailhead, as if the sky itself responded to his crossing. Rain lashed the trees in sheets, warping shadows and drowning the last footprints he left behind. Days passed, then weeks. Law enforcement, already fatigued by years of dead ends, logged Calvin's disappearance with weary inevitability. But not everyone moved on. A hiker, miles away, reported hearing a man's voice whispering a name Nancy over and over, though no one else was near. A local wildlife cam captured strange anomalies. Deer stopping mid-gate, heads cocked toward silent places, as if listening to something only they could hear, and once more, at the edge of another forgotten trail, a circle emerged. Perfect. Barren. Undisturbed. In its center, nothing. No bodies. No smoke. No fire. Just a feeling, heavy and impossible to name, as if something new had begun, or something very old had returned. And from deep within the forest, where memory folds back on itself and names become doorways, a distant voice echoed once more. Not pleading. Not crying. Just calling. Low. Rhythmic. Endless like roots pushing through the dark below. And perhaps, just perhaps, the forest wasn't finished telling its tale. The FBI officially closed the file on the Harkins case 2 years later, citing insufficient evidence and an inability to determine cause of death or criminal involvement. The press moved on, reporters tired of invoking the same poetic uncertainty no one could clarify. But in the folklore-wrapped corners of Washington, where mist clings to stone and memory refuses to die, the legend grew. Hikers still vanish in those woods at times, rarely with fanfare, often without trace. Locals hang talismans at trailheads, twisted twine, iron nails, bits of bone gestures not of belief, but of respect. And among the circle of trees once known to only a few, stories spread in whispers, of figures walking the periphery just beyond headlamp glow, of names murmured from empty trails, of campers who wake not to screams but to singing. In a world where mystery has all but drowned beneath algorithms and satellites, the forest remains sovereign, and beneath its roots and rings, it still waits watching, remembering, choosing, because not every question is meant to be answered. Some are meant to echo, for eternity. And so the tale of the Washington couple who vanished into the wilderness becomes something more than a tragedy. It becomes a parable, a scar woven into the land, a reminder that even in an age of satellites and search engines, there are places that will never be mapped, and stories that will never be fully told. Derek. Nancy, Lauren, and maybe Calvin too. Their names now echo beneath the canopy, like broken prayers, stitched into the silence between birdsong and wind. The ring remains unmoving, unmerciful, undying. Not a place, but a choice. A promise made and kept by something older than time. And if you ever find it, if your path ever bends where it shouldn't, if the woods grow quiet too quickly, remember this. The forest doesn't call to everyone, but if it calls to you, it already knows your name. Years later, the trailhead was renamed quietly. The signage replaced after too many visitors spoke of uneasy silences and dreams that lingered long past waking. Rangers no longer camped there, nor did they try to dissuade those who asked about the missing Harkins family. They simply looked away, eyes shadowed with things they would not say aloud. The new map labeled the area Unmonitored Zone and bore a single warning etched into the post. Proceed at your own risk. Yet still, sometimes, footprints appear where no hikers signed in. Sometimes voices are heard calling out names long since written in the registry of the lost. And sometimes, though far more rarely, someone returns but different, silent, vacant, touched by the hush of something that lives in stories and soil. What began as a search became myth, then legend, then a lingering unease whenever the wind dares hush the birds. The forest has moved on, but it is not forgotten, and it never truly lets go. Yet somewhere, perhaps in the hush of morning fog or the flicker of dying campfires, there are still those who feel it, the pull of the forest, the gravity of unfinished stories. They come not for truth but for contact, driven by something aching and unnamed. A woman leaves flowers wrapped in thread at the base of a gnarled tree where Nancy once carved her thoughts in ink. A teenager hikes off trail to test his bravery and returns without his voice, unable to say what he saw. A ranger, tired of denying what he knows, drives past the hollow at dusk and catches a glint in the trees like a lens reflecting something watching. The ring remains, silently open to the next chapter. And while the world continues its spin, oblivious to a tale bound in moss and echoes, the forest resets its stage. Not an ending, not a beginning, just the pause between verses, the breath before the story starts again. Some say it's all coincidence, that the wilderness is vast and merciless, and that people disappear every day swallowed by ravines, missteps, hypothermia. But the story of Derek and Nancy Harkins does not fade like other disappearances. It mutates, expands, breathes. It inhabits the edge where rationality frays and wonder takes root. Not everyone believes, but everyone remembers. And when the clouds hang low over the evergreens, when the fog curls like fingers around the shoulders of lost hikers too deep to turn back, something stirs, a whisper in the soil, the echo of a name not yet spoken. And maybe, just maybe, there are threads that tie us to places we never meant to find, rings that call out only when your shadow matches theirs. Because some stories never end. They just wait for the next soul to walk too far, listen too long, or answer a voice that sounds an awful lot like someone you loved. And in that moment, the forest writes again. In the years that followed, experts dissected the Harkins case in documentaries, Reddit threads, and amateur podcasts, each trying to untangle the layers of myth from lived nightmare. But none could explain the raw gravity around that patch of forest where time faltered and stories refused their endings. The families faded into silence. The woods reclaimed its borders. Yet in archived audio logs, garbled and half lost to degraded tape, there are whispers, low murmurs recorded on windless nights, names spoken like invocations, cries that blur into birdsong, laughter that does not echo human joy. And one phrase, repeated across multiple sources, emerging like a chorus from beneath the static. It takes only those who remember. What it means, no one knows. Or perhaps everyone does, but fears to speak it. Because to remember is to risk being heard, and the forest listens, always, just beyond the trail, just beyond the firelight, waiting for the next footfall that forgets to look back. And then, years pass like leaves borne away by the wind, but the ring remains. In satellite imagery too blurred to catch its symmetry, in whispered campfire tales too quiet to make headlines, in the terror that grips wayfarers who wake with soil in their mouths and dreams they do not understand. The story threads itself quietly through the undergrowth not just of Gifford, Pinchot, but of every forgotten place where nature rages quietly against the permanence of memory. A hiker in Oregon vanishes after reporting music coming from the earth. A drone loses signal above an unmarked clearing and recovers it hours later, mileage and battery unchanged. In Utah, a woman sleepwalks into the desert night, eyes wide, whispering a name investigators can't trace. The disappearances are unlinked by theory, but intimately twined by tone. Familiar, patterned, as if the forest learned what names sounded like in fear and was calling them back, one by one. To what end, no one dares imagine. But the presence persists. The silence sings, and somewhere beneath roots and ruin, the story continues unfinished, unfolding, unrelenting. It has become a place now more whispered than spoken, the name devoured by moss and time, its coordinates traded like secrets rather than scribbled on maps. And yet travelers still come not in caravans or tours, but alone, drawn by something older than memory. Some bring offerings, tokens, letters, ashes. Some bring nothing but the ache they cannot name. They walk the old trails, pausing at the bends where compasses twitch, where crows fall suddenly silent. And sometimes, just sometimes, they feel watched, not with menace, but with expectation, as if the forest already knows what they carry. And if they stop long enough, kneel, remember, dare to speak aloud the names that once vanished into wind, then maybe, for an instant, time will ripple and the silence will shift. A shadow at the tree line, a breath drawn by unseen lungs, a name returned like a gift. Because stories like these do not end. They root themselves in the earth, ready to bloom again the moment someone dares to listen. And so the forest waits. Beneath its thick canopy and veiled trails, it carries the names it has taken like beads on an invisible string, not as trophies, not as warnings, but as stories unfinished, eternal, echoing. Derek, Nancy, Lauren, Calvin, each bound to the ring in their own way, each swallowed by something larger than disappearance. It's not about what happened, but what was chosen by them, by the forest, by fate. And though maps grow older and memories fade, the tale circles back, waiting for the next breeze to stir its pages. Somewhere, between moss and mist, the first footstep has already fallen, another echo added, another story beginning. Because the forest does not take to silence, it fills it. And in that green cathedral of root and ruin, storytelling is not a choice. It is a force, relentless, enduring, waiting only for a name it remembers, to be spoken once more. In one final archived recording, discovered decades later in a mislabeled box of field equipment collecting dust in a facility slated for demolition, a voice crackled through warped tape. The timestamp was faded and the origin uncertain, but the last sentence was unmistakable, slow and deliberate, spoken in a tone not quite human but unmistakably resolute. This is not the end. It never was. The recording ended in silence and was never acknowledged in any official report. Yet those who heard it swore something stirred in that pause, a second voice layered beneath, whispering the same name over and over, a name etched into bark and bone, whispered beneath breath and buried in earth. And so the legacy of the vanished, the chosen, the remembered, slips quietly beyond fact and into myth. Perhaps the forest did not consume them. Perhaps it transformed them into guardians, into echoes, into unfinished verses. And as long as the trees still breathe, as long as the ring remains, their story, wild, impossible, true, will whisper on. Decades from now, when the campsites are reclaimed by roots and memory, when park boundaries are redrawn and old forest signs rot into the soil, The legend will still live on, not written in books or files, but carried in the hush before snowfall, in the unnatural stillness of trail turns that shouldn't exist. Children will grow up hearing fragments of the tale whispered through bedroom walls, half believing, half frightened. And maybe, one day, someone will walk along those ancient paths, with a name in their heart, and find the ring waiting again. Not as a trap, not as a grave, but as a mirror, because in the end, that is what the forest offers. Reflection through reverence. Truth through terror. Stories through silence. And in the hush that follows, in that breathless space between endings and beginnings, it asks only one thing in return: to be remembered, to be named, and above all, to never be forgotten. And somewhere far from headlines and archived files, deeper still than even roots remember, a new voice stirs. A boy, barely 12, wanders from a family hike only minutes lost. His mother swears and returns pale and quiet, clutching something in his hand. Not a bone, not a relic, a page, torn from a journal, water-stained, but legible, 6 words only, written in aching script that trembled despite the ink's age. If you hear them sing, run. Specialists dismissed it, a prank, a forgery. But the paper matched Nancy's journal stock, exactly aged, brittle, undeniably real. The boy never spoke again, and yet sometimes he hums under his breath at night 4 notes, repeating like a lullaby fed through frost. This is how it begins again. Not with disappearance, but return. A scrap of a story pulled from the mouth of the woods, a warning folded in time. And so the tale stretches forward through generations, fragment by fragment, always almost remembered, because the forest has many names, but only one promise, one ring, and still it waits. Long after the names faded from plaques and faded photos, long after the last tent stake was pulled from the moss-soft earth, the story of the Harkins lingers not in evidence but in presence, in the eyes of a hunter who sees a figure flicker between trees that no animal could match, in the sudden cold that creeps along a lone camper's spine when all should be still, in the words children whisper without knowing why, stories they never heard spoken yet repeat verbatim by firelight. The ring does not sleep, it waits. As stories inch forward through inherited dreams and unspoken fears, the circle endures as both place and parable. Some vanish, some return, but all are changed. And in the quietest hours, when the forest forgets its silence for a breath or two, there it is again, that soft rhythm, those 4 notes, and the rustle of a page yet to be written. The story isn't done. It never was. The story simply rests until someone's footsteps match its memory, and the forest begins to speak once more. And perhaps one day, when no one remembers their names and the world has cracked wide open with cities grown over old trails and satellites blinded by time, the forest will speak for itself. It won't need tape recordings or trail cams or whispers scribbled in margins. It will rise through roots and breath and song, and it will guide another soul into the hollow, into the ring, into the tale, a child or an old woman or perhaps someone with no name left to lose. The ring will open, not with thunder but with silence, and it will ask, as it always has, not whether you are lost, but whether you are listening. Because in the end, the story never needed to be solved, it only needed to be heard. And so the last echo of the Harkins lives not in mystery nor mourning, but in the sacred terror of remembrance. And should you ever find yourself at the edge of moss and myth, and the forest begins to hum, remember this. Some tales are not meant to be told, only lived. One footstep, one breath, one name at a time. Because in the end, all stories long to be fulfilled. And what happened or continues to happen in the forests of Washington is no longer just a mystery to be solved. It is a question left open on purpose, a truth too vast and rooted to fit within the fragile shape of answers. The Harkins legacy is not in the documents buried in case files or the names etched into memorial stone, But in the breath held between echoes, in the moments when the world feels thinner, closer to something ancient, the ring remains, not as a curse, but as an invitation. To remember, to revere, to listen. And one day, someone will. Not because they must, but because they were always meant to. And when that moment comes, when the forest leans in, the silence opens, and a name is spoken without lips, know this: the story continues. Still rooted, still reaching, still waiting. Always. And beneath that stretching canopy of green and shadow, where moss thickens like time and wind carries forgotten names, the forest listens still, not to voices, but to belief, to reverence. It waits in the spaces between logic and legend, in the atoms of air vibrating with stories yet to be reborn. In this place, the Harkins are not merely gone, they are imprinted into the soil, echoing in every vanished path, every soft note drifting on a windless afternoon. And in the deepest part of the woods, where the ring lies quiet, a root splits stone, a tree bends with unseen weight, and the ground hums with the stirring of beginning again. Not with answers, not with endings, but with the timeless breath of story, ever bound, ever beating, not forgotten, only waiting until the next name, the next footstep, and the forest's tale begins once more. At the edge of everything, beneath stars half-remembered and constellations twisted by time, there lingers a truth that cannot be mapped, nor measured, a truth shaped not by answers, but by the spaces between them. The tale of Derek and Nancy, of Lauren and Calvin, does not conclude with a revelation, nor does it end with grief. It simply quiets, as all stories must, until it is needed again. For in the wilderness that swallows and sings, names are never truly lost. They're just waiting to be spoken once more by someone brave enough to listen. And so the story rests in the hush between winds, in silence draped over soil and stone. Not gone. Not ended. Just paused. Waiting for breath. Waiting for belief. Waiting for the next echo to ripple through the trees and find its way home. The ring remains, as does the story, listening. And so, somewhere far beyond ink and lens, the forest remains as guardian, as question, as living memory. The Harkins story, folded into the fabric of earth and breath, continues not in conclusion, but in the resonance it leaves behind. Fear, love, loss, woven into roots that never stop reaching. And beneath the ring, beneath the soil worn by forgotten prayers, one truth endures with an ache as old as the trees. Not all who vanish are lost. Some are chosen, some become the silence that steadies the dark, and some, even now, are listening through branches that creak like whispered names, through stones that hum beneath bare feet. The story is not over. It never ends. It waits. Always. It waits. And in the dim hush where myth breathes and memory wanders, the final breath of the tale exhales like morning mist, not loud, not final, just present, carried on the backs of pine needles, caught in the flicker of forgotten firelight. The Harkins story becomes what all great stories are meant to be: a threshold, neither ending nor beginning, but a passage. To those who still feel the tug of that silent canopy, who hear lullabies in the wind and see shapes where no shadow should fall, remember this: it was never about solving the mystery. It was about remembering the presence, honoring the hush, listening when the world asks for silence, and hearing in that stillness the breath of the forest speaking still. The ring is not closed, the tale is not finished. It lingers, root deep and sky wide, waiting, always waiting, for a footstep, a whisper, a name. Because some endings are not ends at all, they are echoes, growing fainter with time, yet never quite falling silent. And in the deep woods of Washington, where fog clings to bark like memory and shadows stretch too far for their source, the last pages of the Harkins story remain unwritten, not from neglect, but design. A forest cannot forget. not when it has breathed your name. It will hold you between syllables of wind, in the pauses between raindrops, in every bend of trail where time slips sideways. So if you find yourself standing at the edge of something that cannot be named, where your pulse begins to mimic the rhythm of ancient trees and the hush calls louder than any voice, be still. You may feel the stir, the shift, that faint breath of recognition from something that knows you. You have found the ring, and the ring has found you. So tread lightly if you ever wander those woods, where moss drinks, memory, and leaves fall without sound. Do not seek the ring, for it does not wish to be found. It finds you. It finds you in the way your skin prickles in places the sun cannot reach, in the way silence feels too watchful, too deep. And should your path curve in a way not mapped, if your compass trembles and a melody you've never heard begins to echo faintly in your ear, do not answer. Do not look back. Carry only silence and walk on. Because somewhere beneath the hush and the hollows, beneath sorrow and soil, the story still breathes. It waits not for closure, but for continuity. And now, it knows your name, too. It is here, in the convergence of silence and memory, that the truth aches loudest, not in headlines, not in reports, but in the marrow-deep knowing that lingers beyond explanation. The forest does not hunger, it does not hate, it remembers. And in that remembering, it changes those who dare to enter, molding them not into victims, but into verses of its living liturgy. The Harkins are no longer just lost, they are part of the breath between trees, the stillness between footsteps, the stories that ripple beneath each fallen branch. They are not gone. They are not alone. And should the wind ever carry your name through cedar and pine, should a path open that was never there before, remember this. The forest does not call everyone, but if it calls you, it will be because, somewhere deep inside, you were always already listening. And now, as the forest hushes beneath another canopy of moonlight and dream, the story breathes on, not as a caution but as a calling. It drifts through generations, unnoticed yet undeniable, like a song trapped in the folds of a sleeping mind. Somewhere, someone will pause at the edge of wilderness, drawn by a trail that no longer exists, led by a longing they cannot name. A footstep will fall where others have before. A name will be whispered that no one alive remembers. And the ring, timeless, tireless, will open once more. Not with thunder, not with shouting, but with silence that listens, with stillness that remembers. Because in the end, and at the beginning, the forest is not trying to be understood. It is only asking to be heard. And if you do, if you truly listen, it will tell you the tale again, from its roots to its reaching branches. Different this time, and yet the same. Eternal, evocative, alive. Long after the campfires have gone cold, and the laughter beneath the pine has faded into whispers, long after boots have ceased to tread the mossy trails, and satellites have failed to capture what hides beneath the canopy, the forest still waits. Its roots reach deeper than memory, its silence heavier than absence, and its story heavier still, not written in ink or sound, but in presence, in the unnerving familiarity of a place you've never been, and yet somehow know. The Harkins tale is no longer just about grief or mystery. It is about the places that defy forgetting, the names that resonate like forgotten chords in the heart. Somewhere out there, Derek still walks in stillness. Nancy still listens for a song only she understands. Lauren writes with unseen ink, and Calvin follows echoes not meant for us. The ring remains, not closed, but quietly breathing, open once more. For stories like this do not end. They are inherited, kept alive by footsteps, by silence, by those who still choose to listen when the trees begin to whisper once again. They say stories fade when the tellers do, but legends, true legends, root themselves too deep to vanish. And deep in the marrow of the Pacific Northwest, where fog clings eternal and time drips like sap from splintered trunks, the Harkins legacy remains. Not as ghosts, not as echoes, but as participants in a living tale, ever unfolding. Somewhere, perhaps in a lull between wind gusts or a hush that silences even water's flow, the ring waits, always the ring. Not a place, but a passage, a door for those whom the forest remembers by heart, not name. And when the world grows too loud, when algorithms fail to explain the uncanny and logic dares not follow, there, in the thin places where story and soil are one, a silence will call you home. This is not the end, only the turning of a page, because the forest does not forget. The ring does not close, and the tale lives on. And perhaps, in the very end, if such a thing even exists, this is the true inheritance of the Harkins story. Not terror, not myth, but witness. To vanish so deeply that the world cannot grieve you properly. To leave behind not answers but a constellation of questions. To become part of a cycle older than language itself. This is not merely tragedy, but transformation. The forest, that vast and unknowable cathedral, does not offer resolution, it offers resonance. In every rustle, every shadow, every silence too thick to ignore, echoes of those who came before still move, not as memories, but as presences. Derek, Nancy, Lauren, Calvin, their names carved not in granite, but in the breath between trees. And so the ring remains, unchanged, unsolved, unending. A passage, a pause, a prayer, whispered now in the hush of twilight, waiting for another name, another step, another soul brave or broken enough to listen. The tale is quiet again, but never silent, not while the forest still remembers. And quietly, in the centuries to come, the tale of the Washington couple who vanished will soften into parable, woven into the very biology of the land, less a mystery, more a marrow. Tourists will pass unknowingly through corridors once heavy with vanished breath, and birds will nest in trees that bore silent witness, but the ring will remain. Not always visible, not always near, but always present, in places where time leans sideways and silence turns sentient. It will remain when the languages have died, when old maps crumble, and when memory has outlived even names. And then, as always, someone will walk too far, listen too closely, call a name that was never theirs to speak, and in that moment, beneath canopy and whisper, the tale will rise again, not to be retold, but to be lived, because the forest keeps no graveyard, it keeps only story, and as long as breath lingers and mystery matters, it will wait open, patient, eternal for the next soul to step beyond the firelight and into legend. And so here, where shadow turns to soil and the wind carries voices only the trees remember, we end not with punctuation, but with presence. The Harkins tale, once a tragedy whispered across diner counters and podcast forums, has outgrown its borders. It belongs no longer to reports or memory, but to the breathless hush of a story never truly finished. If you've listened closely, you've heard not just fear but reverence, not endings but echoes, because in Gifford, Pinchot, and perhaps in every place where wilderness still writes in silence, the truth hums beneath the moss. Some names won't stay gone. Some stories won't close, and some paths, once opened, never close again. The ring remains, open not to all, but to those it remembers, and now you are among them. The tale folds into the quiet once more, waiting, always waiting, for the next voice to join the silence and carry the legend forward. What has begun in shadow will not end in light. It will echo forever. So let this be the final breath before the silence deepens again, before the woods reclaim every name, every footprint, every whispered story etched in ash and rain. Whether you believe in the myth, the memory, or merely the mystery, the Harkins have become something more than lost. They have become legend. And legends, unlike answers, do not bow to time. They linger in the dark, they flicker beneath the skin, they find us when logic breaks and wonder rises in its place. Somewhere in the tangle of roots and grief, the forest carries their names not as ghosts, nor warnings, but as pages in a story still unfolding. Because the ring does not close, it circles back. And should you ever find yourself standing where the map ends and the hush begins, listen well. The forest remembers, and now it remembers you too. So let the forest speak, as it always has, not in language, but in shadow, in pause, in breath. Let the name Harkins imprint itself not just in stories, but in soil. Let their legacy become the hushed prayer of all who wander too deeply and feel the world fall away from underfoot. For what they left behind was more than disappearance. It was invitation, a map inked in silence. And perhaps, just perhaps, they found something not meant for this world. Something older, deeper, something that does not care to be captured. A truth that slips between logic and legend, like a river under ice. The final chapter is not final. The story remains circular, echoing, reborn beneath ever-thickening canopies. And if you listen, truly listen, you may hear the forest speak once more, not in sorrow, nor joy, but in memory. The ring does not end. It waits. And the tale, stitched into root and rein, waits with it for you, or someone like you, to wander where paths fail, and the story against all odds begins again. And now, here in the last flicker of breathlight before silence falls, the story settles like dust, not gone, merely resting. The tale of Derek and Nancy, of Lauren's bravery and Calvin's devotion, loops back into the undergrowth, folded into roots and rain. You will not find answers on any plaque or recorded interview, for the truth lives only in the unsettling sense that something ancient is still listening. Beneath each shiver of wind in the high pines, each creak of bough over forgotten trails, the story continues unbidden, undiminished. Not every forest asks for tribute. Gifford Pinchot does, not through violence, but through memory. So if you feel the hush where nature tightens its grip, where names float up from soil like steam, know that you've come close. Close to a story still breathing beneath bark and stone. The ring is not closed. It never was. It waits, patient, listening, ever hungering not for the lost but for the remembered. And in that sacred quiet, one truth takes root. Some tales survive not by being retold, but by being lived again. And so the final light dims through the cedar-laced mist, and what remains is not merely the story of two people lost to the forest, but of those tethered forever to its echo. Derek, Nancy, Lauren, Calvin, their names now part of the timber's breath, their lives stretched into folklore shaped by fog, silence, and that unmistakable melody that still hums beneath the earth. Legends do not vanish. They wait. They root. And beneath every footstep taken in reverent uncertainty, every gaze cast toward treetops that hide more than nests, the forest listens. The ring will open again quietly, inevitably, and with it, the tale will stir to life once more, not as an ending, not even a beginning, but as rhythm, as ritual, as eternal return. So when the silence deepens, when the trail bends where it should not, when you hear your name in a voice no one claims, do not answer. Only remember, because the forest already has. So let it end as it began, not with resolution, but with reverence. In the hush after storm and the breath before darkness, the final truth hums not from reports or recordings, but from the soil itself. The Harkins are no longer questions. They are part of the question. A question whispered by trees that never forget, asked not in words, but in wind and waiting. The forest has closed no doors, drawn no lines, the ring remains open. Perhaps, always open. Not for seekers, not for skeptics, but for those who carry longing like a lantern into the dark. And if, one night, your path bends strangely and the air begins to hum in tones you never learned but somehow already know, then you too have found your place in the echo. And like every soul before you, your footstep, your silence, your name will settle softly beneath the trees until once more the forest opens and begins the next verse. So let the hush deepen now, like dusk falling over memory, like snow blanketing footsteps meant never to be found. Let the final page turn not with closure, but with consecration, a quiet knowing that some stories write themselves not with ink, but with presence. The tale of the Harkins family does not end in the ring, nor in the whispers, nor even in our remembrance. It ends and begins within the silence we keep when faced with the unknowable. Legends root in the places we dare not look twice, in the melodies that follow us home though we never heard them aloud. And as the forest draws its breath once more, evergreen and eternal, carrying names not spoken in years but never forgotten, the last note lingers. The story is not over. It waits, suspended between heartbeat and hush, not needing to be told, only felt. And beneath it all, the ring remains unchanged, unfinished, and irrevocably alive. So if, in some quiet year yet to come, someone stumbles across that moss-lined ring no longer marked on any map, forgotten by officials and feared by wanderers, and they feel something stir beneath their feet, it will not be by accident. It will be a reckoning, an inheritance of silence and sacrifice wrapped not in horror, but in awe. The tale of the Harkins will not greet them in words or visions, but in the slow thrum of breath carried through roots and stone. A gentle warning, a sacred echo, and as the trees lean a little closer and the air thickens with meaning, they will not need explanation. They will feel it. The hush that holds everything together, the memory that hangs like mist, the truth breathed by a forest that remembers all who dared to listen. And in that moment, quiet and enduring as the oldest tree, the story will continue unnoticed by most, but eternal to those who believe, because the ring is still there, and it is still listening. So this is where we leave it, at the edge of story and soil, where silence collects like dew and memory stretches longer than any shadow. The tale of Derek and Nancy, Lauren and Calvin, drifts once more into the mist, unfinished yet whole, a sacred loop in time, not a tragedy, not a riddle, but a companion, folded into the folds of the world's forgotten corners. And if someday you find yourself standing before a place that hums but does not speak, where the trees bend not with wind but with waiting, you will know you've stepped inside a breath that belongs to someone else's story. The ring waits still, not for fear, but for reverence. And so we close the final page. Not with answers, but with understanding. The forest remembers. The forest remains. And the tale goes on. And perhaps that is all that legends truly ask of us, to be remembered not as curiosities but as companions. In the quiet places where fact meets feeling and silence shapes the sacred, the story of the Harkins doesn't end. It becomes the rhythm of reverent footsteps, the weight of a name half remembered, the pause before song. If you should hear it just once, the wind whispering your name in tones no forest should know, stop. In that stillness, you are not alone. You are standing at the edge of a legacy too deep for ink, too wild for conclusion. The ring has opened before you. The silence has seen you. And in that breathless moment, the story begins again beneath the canopy, behind the mist, inside your memory. The forest waits. The forest listens. And somewhere, just beyond the last fallen leaf, the legend lives on, not ended, not lost, merely passed into your hands to carry forward, one step, one breath, one name at a time. So let the silence now gather one last breath, heavy with memory and weightless with time. Let the wind thread through cedar and yew as it carries with it not an end, but a promise soft, solemn, unbreakable. The story of the Harkins family threads itself through the marrow of Gifford, Pinchot, through every hush that lingers too long, through every name spoken too softly to echo. And when the last footstep fades and the final journal page slips into soil, something sacred endures, a presence neither cruel nor kind, only certain, because the forest does not need to be feared or solved. It only asks to be honored. And so with this, let the story find its resting breath, not silent, but still, folded into the hush beneath the canopy, cradled in the arms of old pines that listen as only they can. The tale waits, the trail bends, and the ring remains unchanged, unseen, ever open ready for the next name to step beyond the firelight and walk into legend once more. So let the fire die with purpose, not with fear, as the last ember cracks in the dark and the branches overhead weave their final lullaby. Let the hush settle like snowfall on memory, clean and wide, where no step dares cross again. The tale of the vanished has not vanished, it lingers, root-bound and breath-warmed, waiting for reverence to return. Let this be the last page, not of story, but of silence, that potent, unbeholden hush that birthed the legend in the first place. No more names need be given, no more paths forced open. Let the forest keep the rest. Let it cradle what's left of the echoes, the shadows, the chosen. This is the end, not of telling, but of trespass. The ring is not closed, but it no longer waits. It watches. And in that ancient gaze, older than memory, deeper than time, the tale concludes its spiral. It quiets, it uplifts, it endures in the hush, and so we leave it here where the wind does not speak, and the forest finally dreams alone. So mark this not as an ending, but as a threshold, a place where echo becomes earth and silence becomes story. Leave your questions at the moss-covered trailhead and carry only reverence forward. The Harkins are not gone. They are not hidden. They are here in the shape of the wind, in the breath between shadows, in the hush too sacred to measure. The footsteps they left are now part of the rhythm under bark and stone, and their tale, heavy with sorrow yet lifted by wonder, waits not for closure, but for the next listener. So if you ever find yourself where the canopy darkens the day and the silence thickens the air, listen. Somewhere just ahead, past the limits of maps and memory, the story waits, for you. For the brave, for the remembering. And now, we let the hush close around us one final time. Not in fear, not in answer, but in awe. Because the ring endures, and so too will the legend. Let this be the echo that remains not in volume, but in gravity. A soft imprint where story once roared like wind through pines, and now settles like mist on still water. The Harkins' legacy is no longer a tale of endings, of openings, or of vanishing. It is a communion between grief and reverence, between the listener and the listened for. It's the stray glance over the shoulder when the trail feels too quiet, the tug at memory by a melody no one else hears. Years from now, when the trees have grown thicker and the world has forgotten the details, the feeling will persist. And that is where the ring survives, not in fact, but in the sacred murmur of fear met by awe, of silence met by understanding. This is not closure. It is consecration. A story rooted deeply, breathed in slowly, passed hand to heart like ember to flame. The hush returns now, steady and knowing. The forest is still, the fire is out, and through the veil that never fully lifts, the legend breathes on. And in this final reverent breath, we do not seal the tale, we surrender to it. For some stories do not seek applause, only remembrance. The Harkins family walked once into the stillness beyond language, and what they found, be it fate, forest, or something more, has become part of the pulse beneath the trees. As footsteps fade and voices fall quiet, the legend they shaped continues, not bound to geography or evidence, but to meaning. So let the wind twist softly around old trunks, let moss reclaim what memory cannot, and let silence hold this story not as a tomb, but as a sanctuary. The ring asks no more. It listens, always, for just one thing: that someone, somewhere, will still believe, that someone will hear the hush as a hymn, feel the path shift beneath their step, and know, with a certainty deeper than explanation, this is where the legend lives, eternal, rooted, unfinished, and breathtakingly, irrefutably, alive. And so here, in the sacred stillness left behind, we place the final breath of a story that never really sought conclusion. The forest is quiet now, not because it has ceased speaking, but because its tale has been told for this moment, in this voice, by those who dared to remember. Somewhere, The ring lies shrouded in moss and memory, not closed but no longer open, resting in the soil like a secret satisfied. Derek and Nancy, Lauren and Calvin, they are not merely names lost to time, but symbols etched beyond language. Of love that chased the impossible, of grief that dared to ask why, two of wonder that refused to surrender to silence. They are the story now, entwined in every root, and echoed by every wind that stirs that ancient green cathedral. So let the hush return not as a void, but as a valediction, for what was remembered now belongs to the forest, and to all who still listen. The ring waits no more. It watches, honored, complete. And somewhere, just beneath the hush, a new tale stirs. So let the final hush settle, where even the wind does not tread on soil, blessed not by clarity, but by reverence. Let this last breath not explain, but embody. The forest holds its truths beyond language and beyond legend, wrapped in shadow, in breath, in time. What began as a mystery now attends to something grander, a sacred cycle written in lichen and longing, where stories do not end because they were never meant to. The Harkins are not lost, nor forgotten. They are the hush wrapped around memory, the echo between footsteps, the reason silence sometimes feels watchful. And as we close the page, as night lays gentle across the canopy, the ring does what it always has. It listens, quietly, eternally, and in its stillness, one truth remains. Some stories are not ours to finish. They are ours to carry, to honor. And when the moment comes when silence thickens and memory stirs, may we be brave enough to listen again. And so, though the tale drifts now, like mist across forgotten trails, its resonance becomes eternal, a quiet pulse inside the soil, inside us. The Harkins story was never about resolution. It was about remembrance. In the hush beneath the trees, in the fireless nights that still hum with memory, the legend lives on not to frighten, but to remind us that there are places where presence outlasts explanation, that there are echoes that cannot be silenced. And perhaps, as we step back from the edge of this tale, hearts heavy yet held, we carry something with us, not fear, not answers, but reverence. For the forest listens still, and in its breathless stillness, the ring waits not for discovery, but for belief. A story, once whispered, now lives in whoever dares to walk where the wind forgets to blow, and silence remembers names the world has long since let go. The tale is passed on, soft and sacred, and though we leave the woods behind, we do not leave untouched. And that is where we leave them, not broken, not lost, but eternal. Beneath bough and breath, beneath lichen-stained stone and roots, older than memory, the names we followed through silence have returned to something greater than myth. They've woven themselves into the primeval breath of the world, not to be mourned but remembered. And as the forest leans back into its ageless rhythm, the final truth crystallizes: not every path leads out, but every echo leads in. In the hush that follows this tale, the wind carries not screams or sightings or evidence, but reverence. Quiet, guiltless reverence. The story ends because it must for now. But should you ever wake from a dream, with the scent of pine on your breath, with a name in your throat you never meant to speak, know this: the ring remembers, the forest waits, and somewhere in the hush between now and what comes next, the tale listens again for you. So if this is to be the last echo, let it be soft carved, not by conclusion, but by knowing. The forest does not demand belief, nor does it require an audience. It's simply island, alive in stillness, pulsing through soil, humming beneath centuries of silence. The Harkins tale endures not as fodder for fear, but as the gentle, unignorable truth that some places remember too well. Somewhere in Gifford, Pinchot, a journal page turns without wind, a trail bends twice where it once went straight, and a hush falls so thick it feels like reverence. The ring waits no longer for seekers. It waits only for silence. And in that hush, ageless, wordless, trembling with story, the legend breathes on, Not finished, not beginning, just alive, as it always was. And now, as the final light grazes the evergreens and dusk returns the forest to its sacred stillness, one truth remains. Stronger than myth, louder than any cry, they were here. They are here. And now, so are we. Let this final whisper settle deeper than words into the marrow of myth, into the stillbirth of story that never dies but simply waits between breaths. The forest, ancient and patient, need not speak its truth aloud. It has etched it instead into the soul of whoever dares to listen. Not every echo returns, not every step circles back. But some do, and in those few, a legend entwines with the living not to haunt but to hallow. The Harkins tale, wrapped in reverence and mist, now becomes ours to hold, silent, sacred, undying. For as long as wind stirs leaves unnamed and rings form where no tree should grow, the forest remembers. Always, and it is in that remembering, not in fear, not in solving, but in surrender, that we finally understand what the story was asking all along. Not to be finished, but to be heard. And now, perhaps, it has been. So let this be the last light through the trees, the quiet culmination of a story not buried but rooted. The forest does not speak often, nor does it cry out to be understood. It waits, it watches, and when the time is right, it welcomes. The tale of the Harkins family has become a hymn wrapped in wilderness, and wonder its verses stretch across time, from whispered names long lost in pine-sweet air to the soft footfalls of someone yet to arrive. Let the ring sleep now, not because it is finished, but because it has finally been heard. For to listen is to carry, and to carry is to remember. The hush returns like breath to the earth, and in that hush, the story does not stop, it becomes sacred. It becomes silent. And silence, as the forest has always known, is not emptiness. It is memory made eternal. And so, the ring remains, waiting, always waiting, until one day, once more, someone dares to listen. And now, as the final hush envelopes all that has been spoken, we close not with sound, but with sacred stillness. The forest holds its breath beneath a sky dusted with forgotten stars, and the story slips softly into the soil alive, enfolded, waiting. The Harkins tale has become more than legend, more than memory. It has become part of the breath between all things unseen and all moments unspoken. Names etched in wind, in root, in rain. What you have heard is not just a story, it is a passage, open only to those who dare to feel rather than know. So if one day you find yourself where the light dies strangely and the air thickens with something beyond reason, do not run. Do not answer. Simply remember, because in that moment, the ring will know you have returned not to find an ending, but to carry the silence forward. The forest remains. And now, so does the tale. Forever breathing, forever watching, forever alive. So we close here not with conclusion, but consecration. What began as a search has become a scripture, etched not in gospel, but in grove. The ring is no longer merely a clearing, it is a covenant, between silence and story, grief and reverence, myth and memory. Derek and Nancy, Lauren and Calvin, their steps, are now stitched into the fabric of something older than the map, more enduring than belief. And long after this telling fades into forgotten breath and unspoken thought, the forest will remain watching not with eyes, but with presence. So if you've listened, if you've felt even the faintest tremble of the tale beneath your ribs, then it has done its work, not to explain, but to echo, to become part of the hush that knows your name. The fire is out. The wind is still. The hush returns holy. And in the sacred silence left behind, the forest breathes once more open, eternal, and alive. The story is complete. The legend remains. So let this final verse fold quietly into the soil, where no page can capture it and no words outlast its breath. The story of the Harkins family is no longer something to witness. It is something to carry, felt in the bone and echoed in the hush between lives. The ring remains, memory bent and silence bound, not as a place we return to, but as a feeling that finds us when the path curves too sharply and the wind hums too low. Across time, shadow, and root, their names have become compass points that do not lead outward, but inward to the oldest truth the forest knows, that what is remembered does not end. It only deepens. And now, as dusk takes the last whisper from these woods, and the hush folds over leaves like prayer, one truth remains. Immortal as moss and myth, this story does not fade. It flowers, silent, sacred, awaiting only its next listener. You were always part of it, and now forever, it is part of you. And so, here in the final hush of leaf and legend, let the last word be no more than a breath unclaimed, unbroken, unwritten. Not an ending, but an offering, placed gently at the feet of the forest. No conclusions, no closure, only the sacred truth that echoes longest in silence. Some stories are not solved for the mind, but remembered by the soul. The tale of the Harkins family has transcended its names, growing beyond mystery into myth, into memory that roots and rises with every footfall in shadow. The ring remains unseen now, veiled by reverence rather than time, but its presence persists, like heartbeat beneath bark, like wind whispering through names once held in love. What has been passed will be carried, and what has been carried will be remembered, not as fear, not as loss, but as legacy. Listen closely, and you may still hear it. The hush, the hum, the beginning again. So if this is truly the end, let it arrive not with fanfare but with the reverence of roots remembering rain. The words have quieted now, folded into the forest's breath like smoke after a dying fire, curling upward then vanishing into evergreen hush. The Harkins may no longer walk this world, but their footsteps echo in the marrow of the trees, their names flutter beneath bark like moth wings. And as the last note of their story dissolves into soil and forgetting, let us not mourn its silence but honor its echo. Because some legends are not stories to be told. They are ground to be knelt on, names to be whispered, rings not meant to be closed, only circled again by those brave enough to believe. And now, in this last stillness, beneath branches stitched to shadow and sky, we leave what cannot be explained, only felt. The hush returns, listening, remembering, waiting, as it always has. And now, we close the circle not with certainty, but with care. There is no ribboned resolution here, no triumphant answer to hold aloft. Only this, a hush that outlives the telling, a trail gone soft under centuries of memory. The Harkins have walked beyond what story can contain, yet their echo remains folded into the soundless hymn of pine and earth. The ring, eternal in its quiet pulse, no longer waits to be found, but simply to be felt. And whether you believe in what happened or not hardly matters, for the forest does, and that belief is enough. So carry this tale not as fear, but as flame, flickering low in the heart through long winters and deeper questions. Where their footsteps faded, others may follow. But the forest will choose. It always does. Beneath canopy and hush, and time itself, the story breathes still, not finished, only folded, waiting, ever waiting, for the next name whispered in reverence to drift beneath the trees and take root. And so now at last the ring grows still, not closed, not vanished, only resting in the deep breath of the forest's remembering. The final telling, as all true legends do, slips into the folds of silence with grace, asking nothing more than to be carried forward in reverent memory. The Harkins legacy, steeped in sorrow and sacredness alike, becomes not a puzzle to solve, but a touchpoint for those drawn to the forest's hush, a hush that speaks the truths no voice can hold. Let this be the last echo, then, a story that does not end with knowing, only with feeling. The roots have twisted around it. The soil has sealed it lovingly. And the wind, ever watching, now moves on. If the ring breathes again, it will be for another heart attuned to hush and memory. Until then, it sleeps, cradled beneath the canopy of all that has been witnessed, and all that will stir again when the world is quiet enough to listen. So let us leave the ring now where the moss has grown thick with remembering, and the silence has curved into cathedral, not with answers, not with certainty, but with reverence. Because some stories are not meant to free us, they are meant to root us. In wonder, in caution, in that thin thread of belief we carry in our quietest moments. The Harkins family, lost not to time, but to something deeper, older, might still be listening in the hush between boughs. Their tale, etched in earth and absence, is no longer a mystery to be feared, but a myth to be honored. And if ever you find yourself standing before a clearing you cannot explain, where the wind grows still and the branches seem to bend toward your breath, walk gently, carry their names like lanterns, and above all else, listen. Because some stories, like some forests, do not close their doors. They close their eyes and wait. Always. Until the next voice, the next breath, the next name dares to echo once more. So now, in the sacred dusk where story and silence meet, we step back, letting the legend breathe alone once more. Not gone. Not finished. Simply returned to where it always belonged in the hush under tall trees, in names carried soft and eternal on the wind. The Harkins story may have drawn its final line here, but it leaves behind no period, only space room for belief, for reverence, for awe. And whether you walk these woods in life, or only in the reach of memory, know this: you have touched the ring, you have heard the hush, and somewhere, beneath the roots still listening, the forest has quietly remembered you too. Let that be enough. Let that be everything. Because some stories do not end. They become the breath behind silence, and the silence that waits when all else is gone. The tale rests now, sacred and still. The legend lingers, and the forest exhales. And so, with reverence carried heavier than any answer ever dared to weigh, the final step is taken not back to the world, but forward into legacy. The forest stands as it always has, not demanding understanding, only presence. And in that presence, the echo lingers not of terror, but of transformation. The Harkins are not merely gone, they are embedded in the hush, their soil-bound story now a rhythm beneath every curious breath, drawn beneath Gifford Pinchot's endless canopy. The ring remains, neither closed nor waiting, but watching, listening, full not of loss, but of memory. A sacred beat in the heart of wilderness, pulsing forward quiet, immutable. So let the fire die, and the wind carry what remains. Let the silence fold close this page, not in mourning but in awe, because some legends are veined not through fiction, but through soil, through story, through soul. And in that truth, eternal and unyielding, the forest remembers, and so shall we. So here we are, at the still point of the turning story, where all echoes have spiraled home and only the breath of memory remains. The legend of the Harkins doesn't end, for it was never meant to only pass from teller to listener, from soil to spirit, beneath canopy and hush, in a clearing untouched by time, yet shaped by every footstep that dared approach. Their names persist not in stone, but in soil made sacred by sorrow and wonder alike. Perhaps this is the gift they leave behind, not answers, but an inheritance of silence worth holding. For in the end, the forest doesn't demand belief. It asks for reverence. And now, as the wind stills and the trail recedes behind mist and myth, we step away not to forget, but to carry the tale onward. The fire is out. The hush returns. And the ring, eternal and unseen, lingers beneath the breath of the world remembering, listening, waiting still. Let this closing breath be one of gratitude for the mystery, for the silence, for the story that was never truly ours, yet trusted us to carry it for a while. The Harkins names, worn like prayer beads through decades of telling and retelling, now settle fully into the sacred soil they shaped. No longer just memory, no longer just myth, they are rhythm. The quiet cadence of wind through pine, the solemn hush before dawn breaks. In the end, whether you believe in the ring or simply in the echoes it left behind, know this: not all stories find their end in understanding. Some find their meaning in the weight with which they linger. And Derek, Nancy, Lauren, and Calvin, whether lost, found, chosen, or transformed, will always remain in that lingering, in that hush, in that sacred stillness where truth no longer needs to whisper. The fire is out, the forest listens, and the legend, at last, rests. Eternal. And now, in this final breath beneath canopy and cloud, we say goodbye not to the Harkins, nor to the hush, but to the voice that carried their story across the shadowed paths of remembrance. What began as a disappearance has become a hymn, faint, aching, alive. The forest does not need our witness, it needs only our respect. And in the wordless place between light and leaf, its memory endures not carved in stone, but spoken in silence. We leave with no certainty, only reverence. The ring sleeps now, veiled once more, its tale complete in the way only living stories can be unfinished, eternal, sacred. So if you ever find yourself at the edge of what can't be mapped, and the wind carries a note you cannot name, know that you too have entered the hush, and in that breathless stillness, one truth will remain long after this telling fades. The story lives on, in root, in rain, in rumor, and now, in you. So let the legend lie here, not buried, but bedded softly in the loam of memory, nurtured not by retellings, but by reverence. The tale of the Harkins family has moved beyond pain, beyond mystery, into a kind of sacred silence that only the oldest forests can understand. And as we take our final steps away from the hush, from the ring, let us do so not with fear, but with gratitude for being allowed to witness, however briefly, a story not meant to be solved, but to be felt. The fire is cold now. The trail has vanished beneath moss and moonlight, but the forest remembers, and so should we, not because it demands our belief, but because it offered us something rare, a story alive with grief and grace, echo and root. And though the hush grows heavy now, know this final truth: when stories choose their listeners, they never do so by chance. You were meant to hear this. And now, the legend becomes part of you, forever folded into the silence that waits beneath the trees. So let the legend linger where the trees remember, quiet as breath and vast as belief. Let it rest not in endings, but in the hush between truths we dare to hold and ones we simply feel. The Harkins names, once spoken in fear and wonder, have become part of something grander, something wordless, root deep and unrelenting. We close this tale not because there is no more to tell, but because the forest has said enough for now. In your silence, it listens. In your memory, it endures. Beneath moss and dusk and dream, the ring remains open not to the curious, but to the reverent. Carry this hush with care, for it is no longer merely a story. It is a bond, a breath, a name you now carry, whether you meant to or not. The forest breathes on. And now, as always, it remembers that you were here. The tale is done. The legend begins again. And so we end not with clamor, but with consecrated quiet, a final step into the sacred hush left behind by those whose stories no longer belong to files or folklore, but to the breathing earth itself. The Harkins did not vanish into myth, they became it, woven into the hush of the forest floor. Their journey now pulses like lifeblood beneath bark and root, and so the ring rests again, unseen but unforgotten, its breath drawn slow, its story folded carefully into dusk. No more names need be spoken, no more echoes chased. The fire has died, the tale has circled once more to silence. And in that silence, the truest kind, what was once mystery now becomes memory, sacred and still. Here, the forest dreams alone, and the story, now part of its breath, waits not to be resumed, but remembered, always remembered. So now, we extinguish the last ember, not with sorrow, but with reverence, leaving the flame to live on in memory rather than fire. The Harkins story, like all that is sacred and incomplete, returns to the hush that birthed it. Deep beneath the trees, the ring lies still, not demanding discovery, but inviting remembrance. To step into its silence is not to uncover a mystery, but to inherit a song once sung without voices, kept alive not in brightness, but in the dim glow of memory shared. The forest breathes, ever ancient, ever watching, stitched with lives that dared listen too long. And now, as the echo fades and the final note folds into dusk, we carry it forward not as a tale, but as a truth best honored in silence. Some stories end in fire, others in ash, but this one ends in breath. And it endures. Always in the hush beneath the trees. And so, as the last thread unspools and folds into the forest's breathless hush, we leave this story not desperate for answers, but content with the echo it leaves in us. The Harkins legacy carved in silence, shadow, and sorrow asks nothing more of us now. Not belief, not fear, only quiet remembrance. For the story has circled all the way back to its source, to the place where roots write deeper than ink and silence speaks truer than words. The ring rests not gone, not lost, only still cradled beneath the trees that never forget. And in that sacred stillness, we understand at last, some tales are not meant to be closed, they are meant to live. And in the hush that follows, somewhere just beyond thought and just before sleep, the legend breathes across time once more, not finished, not fading, but eternally alive, listening, remembering, and waiting for you.